Welcome everybody to our first SAGIC Green Industry webinar. We would have liked to meet everybody in person, but unfortunately this is the second best. At least we can share some information with each other. As you saw, we've got a really nice program waiting for us this morning, and hopefully everybody is going to enjoy it. So firstly, I have to thank the team that put together this webinar. It was really done in a short time, but I think it's something to look forward to. And then secondly, we have to thank our partners. You'll see the information right through the webinar. They are the people that sponsored the webinar and also is in partnership with SAGIC to help us to do our work. Just a few house rules. Can you please all mute and switch off your video if you come on? It's just to save some of the bandwidth. And then also, please sign the attendance register in the chat box. The way you do it, you go to the chat box, put in your name and your organization, so we'll know that you attended the webinar. And there will be opportunity for questions. You can also type that in the chat box, or you can raise the hand. We've got somebody that is monitoring that. And then I think without further ado, we're going to switch over to our keynote speaker, who is Dawie Roodt. He's the chief economist and director of the Efficient Group. I was going to read his bio, but I think everybody knows him. So not really necessary to tell you who he is. I think we all have seen him, but and we all know that when he speaks, one can listen. So Dawie, over to you.
Well, good morning to all of you, and thank you very much for the invite. My name is Dawie Roodt. I'm an economist, and I simply do not understand why you would want an economist to start the day's proceedings, because I'm probably going to put you in a bit of a bad mood. But I'm afraid that is the reality, and you have to face the reality in South Africa, because things are not looking that well or that good in South Africa, and certainly not internationally. But I'm trying to paint or try to find the silver lining somewhere. So bear with me. I'm afraid that the first part of the presentation is certainly not going to be very optimistic, but I am certainly going to try to identify some aspects of the environment in which we find ourselves today, that one can perhaps use as opportunities. So let's get going. And I know I've got a lot of plant people here at various levels, and I've even seen Leonie is here, my good friend. And I can tell you, although I don't know that much about plants, I am very, very passionate, especially about indigenous trees. And I've got more than 100 species on just over a hectare here in Pretoria. So I'm very much in support of your specific industry. All right, so what I'm going to talk about is what can be expected in 2021 and beyond, and see if we can identify some interesting trends and perhaps even some opportunities, because always, despite all sort of things going wrong in South Africa, there are always opportunities. Now, I think I will be talking for about half an hour, and if necessary, I will take questions afterwards as well. Right, let's get going. First of all, let's start off with the international environment. And internationally, things are quite dear mekaar, quite unstable. I think what is happening in the United States today is a very good example of that. But that's not really surprising, because the current trend in the United States, and certainly Donald Trump can be called a new nationalist to an extent, that is something that is actually evident in many other countries in the world as well. So new nationalism is all over the place. I think Brexit is a good example of that. Some other examples, perhaps Brazil with Jair Bolsonaro is another one. India is another one. Russia. There are many examples of new nationalism internationally. Now, that is not necessarily good for the world economy, and it's not good for the world economy because that leads to a lot of political tension quite often, and political tension is not good for trade. And we know that the Americans and the Chinese, for example, got this trade war going. And in the meantime, of course, we have the lockdown internationally, which have a devastating effect on the world economy. We also have internationally exceptionally high levels of state debt. That is government debt. Governments are borrowing money like there is no tomorrow. And today we have international state debt levels or government debt levels at record levels, levels that we've seen last just after the Second World War. At the same time, we have central banks internationally doing all sort of weird things. They print money out of nothing. They call it fancy names like quantitative easing. They reduce interest rates to exceptionally low levels. It's so low in some instances. For example, in Germany, if you want to lend the German government money, you have to pay them before they take your money. That's a sort of, and you think that the plants only, you can only find plants in gardens and in nurseries. Untrue. There's a plant called a magic money tree, or MMT. It actually stands for modern monetary theory, but people quite often refer to that as the magic money tree. Basically what it is governments printing money out of nothing, or central banks printing money out of nothing and spending that money. So where's all this going to end? I'm afraid currently inflation is very low internationally, but I'm afraid if you keep on printing money like this, you are eventually going to get into trouble as far as inflation is concerned. Inflation means that money loses its value. It's not a short-term issue, and I'm not concerned about inflation in the short term, but certainly in South Africa, within a year or so, I think we will start seeing some inflationary pressures building up in South Africa. I'll come back to that a little bit later. So that's the international environment, an environment that is really quite volatile with the world economy currently in a recession. Now, a couple of trends in the current environment, a couple of trends that we are, perhaps all of us are pretty much aware of, but maybe we have to, think about these sort of trends because quite often there are opportunities in these trends. Now, one obvious trend is the trend of working from home. Work from home. Who are the people that can typically benefit from work from home? Well, the people that benefit from work from home are typically people in the service industry. In finance is a very good example. It's also typically people that work in an industry that can be digitized in some way or the other. Finance, again, is a very good example of that. But don't make a mistake. There are many other industries that also benefit from work from home, even manufacturing. There is some technology, for instance, 3D printers makes it possible for people, and in the past we used to work in a factory, for example. Now you can buy a 3D printer and you can work at home and you can still be part of the manufacturing industry. And I think your industry is absolutely ideally positioned where you can do a lot of work actually from home in a way, or at least not you don't necessarily need to go to an office like I used to go to. So keep that in mind. One major problem with work from home is the question on how you're going to monitor your people that work from home, your employees. And in fact, there is wonderful software available already that makes it quite easy to monitor people working from home. In fact, it's quite often easier to catch out those loafers than under normal circumstances. I've got some practical experience, some personal experience with that in my business, where all of a sudden it's much easier to measure people's productivity. And one major issue for people working from home is people are getting lonely. People are getting lonely, and I've seen that, especially people with a lot of responsibility. You are at home, and so quite often people are simply getting very, very tired because you are at home, you get up in the middle of the night, you can't sleep, like it is as well work kind of thing. And I've got a suspicion over time there will be more and more legislation to protect people working from home. And of course, people will be traveling less, and especially if you live around urban areas, for example, if you live in the suburbs, then I suspect that people will be buying less cars, and people will make more use of things like, for example, Uber. There are some major changes taking place in retail. It's something that we all have to be aware of. In future, well, already we can see people buying more and more online. So I do not know if I can actually buy that many plants online. I would like to be able or to be in a position where I can actually buy my indigenous trees online. I don't know if there is actually somebody providing such a service, but that is indeed the craze. And the retail, online retail is without a doubt eating the lunch of traditional retail. We can already see, for instance, that retail property prices are falling very, very sharply. So in future, retail, internet retail will be the thing, and everybody needs to be involved in that. Something else that also that one can witness what is going on is as people are moving out of the city centers, they start working from they're moving to the suburbs, they're moving to their holiday homes, making that their permanent homes. People are more at home, and by the way, that's also an opportunity for your industry. As people are more at home, they want to have certain luxuries at home. They want to paint their houses at home. They want to put in skylights at home. They want to have a jacuzzi at home because they're more at home now. But they also want to have a good and a nice garden. So your industry will, without a doubt, benefit from people working at home. Unfortunately, everybody is not going to benefit, and I suspect that the inner cities will be affected quite negatively because of this new trend of people working from home, and the inner cities is probably going to go in a downward spiral. But the suburbs and some out of the just about everywhere else except for the inner cities is likely to benefit from this new trend of working from home. There are some changes in consumer patterns as well. How that is going to affect your industry, I'm not completely sure, but I would like to share the following with you. Some research in China suggests that after the lockdown was, at the end of their lockdown, everybody expected people to rush back to their offices and to go back to the malls and to go back to restaurants. That did not happen. So I have a suspicion that many of these trends that we are currently seeing will become permanent trends. We've seen it before the lockdown, by the way, but many of these could become permanent because in China what happened is even after the lockdown, people went back to their flats and people kept on ordering online food. They didn't go to the restaurants and things like that. So this we are probably seeing an existing trends that are simply being fast tracked. Some other trends, education is changing completely. All of a sudden, I'm a grade 1 teacher. It nearly led to murder in our house, but I was absolutely amazed about how easy it is to teach my grade 1s, all the tools that are available, the support that we get from the school. And I actually believe that all industries, including your industry, can also and should consider getting more involved in some sort of education or some training effort and do that online. The tools are absolutely amazing available out there. Another trend, not necessarily in your industry, but another trend is that health services are also moving online. There are many examples where you can visit your doctor without going to the doctor. You can even make use of certain specialized health services like that of a dermatologist. There's software available that can that's more successful in identifying cancerous dermatology problems than some of the best specialists out there. So everything is changing because of new technology. Unfortunately, keep in mind that we will see a huge increase in poverty in South Africa, but worldwide as well. And poverty is by far the biggest killer. Poverty, the increase in poverty in South Africa will kill more people than this virus. My calculations suggest that approximately 300,000 people will die because of the increase in poverty over the next 10 years, compared to approximately 20,000 people that could die because of the virus. All deaths are also bad, but I think the increase in poverty is likely to kill even more people, much more people, far more people than the virus itself. Then, of course, technology will change in all sort of other manners. Everybody all of a sudden is an expert on Zoom. We're currently making use of Teams, for instance. So technology, but a technology, but I would like to share with you that I think you have to be aware of, and again, you can capitalize in your industry on that, is money. Money is changing. Payment systems are changing, and even private money like Bitcoin, for example, is becoming much more important and much more prominent. I'm not suggesting go and invest in Bitcoin. That's certainly not what I'm saying. All I'm saying, be aware of new changes in ways of doing money business. This watch of mine, for example, I can use my watch to buy stuff. I've got my credit card information on my watch. Make sure you have the new, most recent technology, the new technology, and make sure that, of course, you stay safe. Keep your passwords secure and stuff like that. I also see some changes as far as food is concerned, very important changes as far as food is concerned. In the past, in the old days, as they say, it was a ritual for families to make food and to eat together. Now that has changed. We started going to restaurants, and now that is changing back to the old days of doing things. Certain rituals, making food together. We are starting to make food together now, and we're eating together. Those sort of changes are also quite obvious, and I think people have to be aware of that. And all sort of foods, and I'm guessing your industry, that should be included in your industry as well. All sort of food, and quite surprisingly, quite often expensive foods. The demand for that is going up. An interesting statistic that I've picked up is that people are buying more lobsters, expensive food, but at the same time, they're buying more candles. So there you have it, people staying at home, buying for a nice dinner at home, and let's light the candle and let's get a little bit romantic. A last point that I want, and this is also important as food, but for the pet industry generally as well. The pet industry is one of those few industries that is pretty much recession proof. People say, listen, we're not going to Switzerland for a holiday, we can't afford it anymore, but let's buy a dog. So surprisingly, quite often when economies go into a recession, it's the pet industry that actually benefit from that. And I think your industry quite often overlaps with the pet industry. Keep that in mind. Right, a few things about the South African economy. We are in very trouble. The South African economy was in trouble before the lockdown. The South African economy was in a recession before the lockdown. The South African economy is in an even deeper recession now, and I think we can call the South African economy rightfully to be in a very, very deep depression. We have never seen this sort of economic collapse ever in the history of this country. So, and very importantly, it is not the virus. Please, people, it is not the virus that is causing all this. It is the lockdown. It is the reaction to the virus that is causing all of this. And if I could have my way, I think the lockdown was far too long, it was far too strict, and we have to end this lockdown as soon as possible and get this economy to grow again as soon as possible. Of course, we have to be responsible because this virus is a deadly virus, but we're causing immense damage to the South African economy. Additionally, we have a government that has caused to the state. The ANC government has led to the collapse of the state at just about all levels. We've got an incompetent and a corrupt government, and you can see that in the local authorities, you can see that in the provincial levels, you can see that in the state-owned enterprises, and you can see it in the national departments. Then at the state-owned enterprises, we all know what's going on at Eskom, which has been ran into the ground financially and operationally. Now, Eskom is only one example. The same goes for PRASA, the same goes for South African Airways, and this just goes on and on. We see many, many businesses closing down. We could see between 100 and 200,000 businesses closing down this year. Many of those will be restaurants. People are simply not going to restaurants that frequently anymore. Expect some labor issues, especially between government and organized labor, because we need to cut back on state spending. And we've already seen COSATU and other trade unions threatening all sort of things, and we know they can be quite destructive when they go into the streets. So expect some labor issues, and of course the increase in poverty will also lead to people trying to get more money somewhere, and there could be some demands even on your industry for increases in wages. But keep in mind there will be a huge increase in the supply of labor. And if you have a job, make sure you keep your job. It's far more important to keep your job than try to get an increase and probably lose your job in the process. Just one or two other figures or numbers that I would like to share with you. 19 million people in South Africa receive grants, 19 million. And we've got 2 million civil servants in South Africa at the various levels, meaning more than 21 million people receive an income from the state every month. We have 14 million people employed, of which 2 million of those are civil servants, which are not necessarily that productive, let's be honest, and they're completely, on average, overpaid. And from the beginning of the year, we've lost 2.5 million jobs in South Africa, and all those jobs were lost in the private sector. None of those jobs were lost in the public sector. And we have 11 million people unemployed in the country. We are in for some serious difficult times in the country. This is a calculation of South Africa's per capita GDP. We have what we've seen for the past 5 years. Every year, South Africa's per capita GDP has been falling. This year, we will see a collapse in per capita GDP, or income. Let's call it income. So income of the average South African this year will fall by approximately 15% on average. 15%. A lot of people lost everything. Some people lose nothing, but on average, the income of the average South African will fall by 15% this year. Then, of course, the president's got all sort of plans, and the plans of the president are the following. It's mostly centered around infrastructure, and of course, he wants to create a lot of jobs. So there will be some infrastructural expenditure. I'm not so sure it's going to work. It's unlikely to really get this economy to start growing quite strongly. But the president plans to create 800,000 new job opportunities before March next year. But there's one important thing that we all have to be aware of is when the politicians talk about jobs, they actually mean keeping people busy. So I'm sure he's going to be successful in keeping 800,000 people busy, but it doesn't mean those are sustainable jobs. And I think it's important for politicians to understand, far more important is not job creation, it is economic growth, and jobs will follow. You cannot just create jobs. Jobs are something that happens. One or two other things, the grants have been extended, these special grants for another 3 months or so. More emphasis on electricity generation, and again, in your industry, see if you can participate in that. See if you can make use of solar energy. There are many options out there because electricity will remain a constraint on economic growth in South Africa. Be aware of that and see if you can become self-sustainable as far as electricity. And you are generally, of course, you have some factories, but for normal day-to-day use in nurseries or in small offices or at homes, you can certainly make use of solar energy, and it's become much cheaper. You have to be connected. Fortunately, that's part of the president's plan. For the rolling out of digital spectrum, you have to be connected, you have to have fast internet, and you have to have a presence on the internet. And of course, there will be much more spending by the president in his economic plan. We just don't know where the money is going to come from. Here is perhaps where the money is going to come. I expect some increases in taxes by the Minister of Finance next year. So expect some tax increases. There will be a so-called solidarity tax. It can be a wealth tax. A wealth tax is a tax on your balance sheet. Be aware of that. I don't think it will be a wealth tax or classical wealth tax because that's quite difficult to implement from a practical point of view. So my suspicion is it's probably going to be an increase in personal income taxes. So, and my advice to all businesses is structure your business and your business structures in such a manner that you pay as little tax as possible. So keep in mind, personal income taxes could go up. I don't think company taxes could go up. So perhaps it's not a bad idea to establish a company and rather reduce your wages or your salary and rather take dividends, as an example, out of your company. So consider those. It's completely and totally legal. So you have to structure your affairs in such a manner that you pay as little tax as possible. I think there could be an increase in certain capital taxes, like capital gains tax, maybe even on estate duties, and the normal other taxes like the fuel levy and the sin taxes, and even VAT may go up. Now, the fuel levies and the sin taxes will go up, VAT may be increased next year. Now, this is the problem that the Minister of Finance faces. The problem is the state spends too much money, and the state spends too much money on people. And if you want to cut back on state spending, inevitably what you need to do, you have to cut back spending on people. And that is what is going to happen. And we're going to have a lot of people, 21 million of them, that are dependent on the state in one way or the other, that will see their income fall over the next couple of years in real terms, not necessarily in nominal terms, but in real terms. Unfortunately, this cutback on state spending itself will be economic growth in the short term. A couple of things on saving, I think this is important to understand, is that we in South Africa, we save approximately between 15 and 20% of the economy is saved in the economy. But this fiscal deficit, the amount of money that the Minister of Finance borrows every year, is also between 15, this year at least, between 15 and 20%. So the Minister of Finance will borrow all the available savings in the economy this year, and that's why South Africa is so very much dependent on foreign inflows, because we do not have sufficient savings locally in the economy, because the fiscus, the state, borrows too much money, because they spend too much money. We are in a debt trap, I'm afraid to say. The state debt levels are at record high levels, and it's continuing to go up. With that, state interest on state debt keeps on going up, and that is a part of the reason why I'm concerned that we could see something called prescribed assets over the next couple of years. The state is simply not getting enough money. They keep on spending like there's no tomorrow. They do not know where they're going to get. Nobody wants to lend them money anymore. And eventually, I think they will force, for example, pension funds to invest in certain kinds of assets. And already, interest on state debt is nearly 5% of the economy. That's state debt only. And of course, those state-owned enterprises, Eskom, the whole lot of them are financially and operationally have been, well, pretty much destroyed. Okay, this is South Africa's state debt as a percentage of the economy. This year, state debt will end around about 84% of GDP, and within the next 5 years, state debt as a percentage of the economy will exceed 100% of the economy. And if you add the state-owned enterprises, because that is also part of the state, then state debt is actually between 10 and 15% relative to the economy higher. So in 5 years' time, we're probably going to have state debt, including the state-owned enterprises, of 115, 120% to GDP. So what happens? Usually, eventually you run out of taxpayers. We have pretty much. We cannot really increase taxes in South Africa that much anymore. Then you run out of capital. We have destroyed much of the capital. Look at Eskom, a good example. Then politicians start looking at prescribed assets, forcing us to buy state debt or Eskom debt for that matter. And then people start running away, and then you see foreign exchange regulations. It's not there yet. We're not there yet. I'm just telling you what is, if you continue this at this trend, these are the sort of things that can happen. And then in the end, this whole thing usually ends in very, very high levels of inflation. But before you go and cut your wrists, before you jump off a high building, there are one or two golden or silver linings that we have to be aware of. What is the South African Reserve Bank? Now, the South African Reserve Bank acts as a counterweight against the mismanagement of the South African economy. And Letsetja Kganyago, the governor of the South African Reserve Bank, is doing an excellent job. But I'm afraid political pressure is likely to keep on increasing on the Reserve Bank over the next while. Economic growth next year is likely to bounce, so the numbers will look good, but it's simply because this year is going to be such a hot year. The judiciary is still very much independent in South Africa. That's good news. The press is very much independent. We all have to be very happy and proud of that. And the South African democracy still works in South Africa. It is possible for the rand to appreciate suddenly in the short term. I think over time, the rand is likely to continue to weaken. So in the short term, it's possible for the rand to appreciate for various reasons, but over time, expect a continuation in the weakness of the currency. Some personal advice: know what is going on. Make sure you understand your industry. Identify your risks in your industry and try to manage those risks in your industry. And there are many ways of managing the risk. For example, you can borrow against your assets, gear, and then the bank takes some risks with you. Make sure, for example, you have various structures, like, for example, companies and trusts that you can use to manage your risk in your various industry. Make sure you diversify. Make sure you have money invested abroad. I take a lot of my clients' money out of the country. Make sure your business stays alive. Make sure you have sufficient liquidity and do not break any laws but pay as little tax as possible. And then perhaps a last comment. I've presented something like more than 1,000 TV programs. And I can remember one day that when they asked me if I would present a TV program, a live program, I immediately said yes. But I can remember that 10 seconds before I went live for the first time, and they're counting, you can hear the countdown in your ear, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and I died 1,000 deaths. And I can remember telling myself, what on earth were you thinking when you said yes? There's no way I will be able to do this. And the countdown went down. 3, 2, 1. And the floor manager showed me I'm on air. And the red light came on. And I realized my mother is watching me. It wasn't easy the first 2 or 3 seconds. And then suddenly I got into it. And I did it. And from then on, I've presented many hundreds of TV programs. But the lesson I want to share with you, what I learned that day, is that I never thought I will be able to do that. But I did it. And that's my advice to you. Try stuff that you think you won't be able to do. And you will be amazed how wrong you can be. Thank you all for listening to me. Very nice talking to you. If there are any questions, I am more than happy to take those.
Are there any questions, Purnay?
I don't have any raised hands at the moment. If anybody would like to ask a question, please just click on the little hand button at the top of your screen.
I must say, if I don't get any questions, I usually feel like a bit of a failure. So nobody wanted to ask, and I see there are quite a lot of people on this meeting. How many people are there? Quite a lot. There are 79 people, and nobody wants to ask me any questions or disagree with me for that matter. So I do. But I see Leonie's got a question. Leonie.
Yes, I do. Hello, Dawie. I actually just want to come back to you. Can you buy plants online? I've been doing that for the past 10 years. For the first 5 years, I think our PostNet account monthly was about 200 Rand, the cost of it. So that meant we sent about one parcel a month, and we were so excited at every one we got. About 5 years ago, there was just this incredible increase in online orders that came through, so much so that we got PostNet to come and collect our parcels, and we had a whole streamlined business. But then came lockdown. And on the 5th of May, when nurseries opened, for that first month, we had 1 or 2 clients a week in the nursery spending 100 or 200 Rand, or maybe 300 Rand. But the online orders came in droves. Some of them up to 3,000 Rand. Plants, I mean, they cost 50, 100 Rand each, and we had to pack them in boxes and send them away. And that has just carried on since the beginning. It went up in May, down a bit in June, and then from mid-August, this has been absolutely amazing to see the number of online orders that come through every day. I think I've had 4 this morning.
Oh, amazing. Well, it just goes to show, Leonie. So imagine if you were not there and you missed this wave. You would have missed it big time. So yeah, well done to you.
Okay, and then the other thing I want to say is that the clients have no regard. I have a client in Worcester. She insists on ordering plants in 20-liter bags. I don't have a courier service that delivers that. So we actually box these plants and send them, and she says they do well. So just to encourage other people, and it's very interesting. But this is really, I think our sales are now 50-50 nursery come online orders.
Well, there you have it. It's called It's called the fourth industrial revolution. Well done.
Okay. Thank you, Dawie.
Anybody else? Anything on the chat box?
I have a raised hand from Andries Buetes. Andries, can you just unmute yourself and then ask your question? There we go. You can speak.
Andries? I can't hear you, Andries. I don't hear a thing. There's a question in the meantime in the chat box about what the law-abiding citizens can do to counter corruption and poor management. Well, the answer to that is obviously in the end, it is your responsibility to vote for the right political party. So in the end, we've got all the power to do that. But in the meantime, what you can do is try to do as little as possible with the state. The state in South Africa is highly inefficient, and try to be self-sustainable and try to create what a friend of mine calls a state-proof business. That means that you have to be as much as possible independent from the state. And a lot of us are already, to a large extent, very much independent from the state. I see Paul's got a raised hand. Paul?
Morning, Dawie. It's a great presentation. Thank you very much. It's no secret that the green industry is booming right now. But can you tell us how long is it going to last? We need to know. And I know the definition of an economist is someone who, if you forget your telephone number, he'll estimate it for you. So could you please estimate how long we're going to have fun?
Well, okay, I can tell you another definition for an economist is somebody that can tell you tomorrow why what he said yesterday didn't come through today. That's another definition. Well, yes, I think what is happening, I think what we're currently experiencing, and I think in your industry as well, is that there's a change. A lot of things changed. There's an upheaval in the country caused by the lockdown, and you're shaking the cage, and all sort of things happening. And many of the things happening are positive, like what Leonie just described, and many things are negative, like, for example, people losing their jobs or an increase in poverty. And it's interesting, there are some other industries, like, for example, people selling houses, the property industry, that's also doing surprisingly well under these circumstances. But I think those are short-term things. Without a doubt, we are in very deep trouble. So on an average level, and there's no such thing as an average South African, but on an average level, we are all poorer and significantly poorer this year. And that's inevitably means that people will eventually start spending less money. So I think in your industry, we're seeing upheaval, we're seeing people are relocating, we see people are staying home more, they're realizing the garden doesn't look good, we need to do something about that. For example, I wanted to put in skylights because I'm working from home much more now, and I had to wait 3 months before I can get somebody putting my skylights in. So those are the sort of things happening, but this is not going to last for very long. Eventually things will settle down somewhere, and I suspect we're going to see by the middle of next year, we're going to see some settling down, and I suspect all industries, including your industry, will see at least a stabilizing out and perhaps a bit of a fall in demand generally. And also keep in mind that the Reserve Bank by the second half of next year, they will start increasing interest rates as well, and that generally will have a negative impact on general demand in the economy. So yes, it could be good times now, but it is because of changing environment. But be careful and make sure that you run your business. Doesn't mean don't expand. Expand, of course, but make sure that you have sufficient cash flow. Cash flow is king, and by the middle of next year, I really do suspect things will start slowing down. There's a question I see. What is the future for property companies like Roodt? Well, that's an interesting. I haven't thought about that. Kay asked me this question. What is the future of the property industries like Roodt? What impact will that have on the landscaping industry? That's an interesting question. Obviously, the retail business is going through a horrible time, except for internet, of course. But the normal traditional retail business are going through a horrible time. Office blocks are going through a horrible time. And even industrial properties are also taking quite a bit of a knock. Retail, or rather residential properties are doing well, like I've said, but I think everything. So I think the patterns in future will certainly be people will be making less use of office space. People will go to retail, normal traditional retail less than usually, but the retail of malls typically will start taking on another character. And it will be, I think people will go to malls not to buy stuff necessarily, but for relaxation. So I think there will be a bit of a change in the retail or those malls and the character thereof, and then people will go there for movies and restaurants and things like that, and not necessarily for retail. How that will impact on the landscaping industry, I am not sure. I really cannot answer that. But if this is a property, a commercial property question, I must tell you I'm concerned about commercial property prices, and I've got a suspicion that may spill over into the landscaping industry as well.
Okay, we have another question from Melt, Dawie, just above K's.
Can you read the question, please? I can't see it here.
Yes, Dawie, what is your view on the future of the service sector? Example, the repairs industry, installation companies, etc.
Yeah, there are two kinds of services that are provided. Now, I'm not going to get too much into this, but basically what it comes down to, one finds that modern economies are more service orientated, and the real growth in modern economies is in the digital space, like internet stuff or finance or investments, that sort of stuff. But there are certain services that are not doing well. And let me give you a good example is, for example, hairdressers. They're not doing well, and we know waiters in restaurants are not doing well because of the pandemic. So it's not all services that will be affected. And I do think there will be a change in these kind of services. Like, for instance, and I use this because I've got some personal experience about this, I'm not going to have my hair cut anymore. The guy that cuts my hair comes to my house now. So I think there's also going to be a bit of a revolution there, is that many of these personal kind of services that cannot be digitized will also change in character. And quite often you will find mechanics coming to your house now to service your car at house. I'm a cycler. I cycle quite a lot, and there are guys, new businesses, and they come to your house and to service your bicycle at your house. And I think that's the kind of changes that one can look out for.
Okay, we have two more questions in the chat box, and then we've got two raised hands. So the first question is from Gail. How will the future of BEE change?
That's a bit of a sensitive question. I must tell you what I've picked up. Let me just make a comment that the BEE, the way it turned out, is causing immense damage to the South African economy. We have to get rid of BEE. Initially, I was very much in favor of BEE, but BEE has become a crony thing today. You find the same faces, the same people benefiting from contracts and being directors and so on, and BEE is certainly not there for poor black people, certainly not. If you really want to empower poor black people, in fact, if you really want to empower people, you have to start where it matters, and that is with good primary education. That's the best form of empowerment. So, and I must say also, I find more and more opposition to BEE. But I'm afraid it is the government, it's going to be with us, and it's probably going to be with us for a long time. But the opposition against BEE, without a doubt, is building up. And then sustainable lifestyles, that's an interesting question. Yes, that is all the rage now. People want to be completely self-sustainable. They want to grow their own tomatoes. My wife is growing her own tomatoes. It's costing us far more for her to grow the tomatoes than what it would have cost us if we simply went to buy the tomatoes. But I do think that is part of the new craze, is that people are wanting to be self-sustainable, growing their own vegetables and stuff like that. And there's another business opportunity where I think you guys can see if you can make use of that opportunity.
Okay, before we jump to Robert's question, we have a raised hand from Richard. Richard, do you want to unmute yourself?
You can hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Dawie, you mentioned quite clearly that many more people are working from home. And the big question is how to measure productivity. Well, my opinion for years has been this 8 to 5 thing is highly inefficient. Results are far better than time spent. How do you see that?
Absolutely, absolutely right. I totally agree with you. And there's a lot of academic research being done exactly on that. So it's more outcome driven. It should be more outcome driven, and it should not be clock driven. You're absolutely right. We find it in all industries in the world. And this is another interesting thing that is happening. Remember, go back 100 years. If you go back 100 years, many of our parents lived on farms 100 years. And in 100 years' time, we moved to the cities and to factories and to offices. And the opposite is happening to an extent. We're not necessarily moving back to the farms, but we're moving back to our homes again, and we're becoming far more productive. But you're absolutely right. Don't measure time, measure productivity.
Great. Now I think we can jump to Robert's question in the chat box. What is your take on the threat of land distribution without compensation on the farming industry?
Huge. That's a huge threat in South Africa. My advice to people is, and again, I've mentioned this in my presentation, make use of structures, like for example, companies, and get foreigners to take a stake in your business, put your ownership in one company and the operation in another company, and that sort of stuff. So make use of, but that without a doubt is a threat. And that threat is already impacting on all sort of things. I speak to international potential investors and journalists all the time, and they ask me about that. But it is for the government, it's important to actually do it, because that's what they said they're going to do, and it's important for them for the symbolic value thereof, to expropriate 1 or 2 farms and to make sure that is on the front pages of the newspapers. They must do that, just to show they've done that. But that's not my biggest concern, expropriation. And by the way, it's not only on land, it's on any private property, any private assets, anything. They can steal your money out of your bank account, quite literally. It's not only about land. But my biggest concern is not the state stealing private property. A much bigger concern for me is unruly mobs that simply go and take a piece of land and go and settle on a piece of land, and the police not doing their job. That, as far as I'm concerned, is a much bigger threat.
Great. I think we can jump back to Andries. Andries, do you want to ask your question? You are unmuted. If not, chat box, Joanne Helia, if you are working at home, how do you measure productivity and work being achieved on a daily basis?
Well, yeah, I mean, depending on your industry, of course, a simpler way of measuring productivity is simply to see if somebody is making money. So the bottom line on your income statement, that is the measurement of productivity. But depending on the industry, my industry is not that difficult, because I can see how my funds perform, for example, and that's what I use to measure my fund managers, if they perform properly. I can see my economist if they send me the necessary calculations, and so that's how I measure productivity. So that's the sort of stuff how you can measure productivity. It's of course not always possible to measure productivity well, but the more digitized or digitizable, if there's such a word, a business is, the easier it is to measure productivity. So I guess it really depends on the industry in which you are in, but you will be amazed about the software that is available to measure people's productivity. But again, don't measure time, try to measure output.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions in the chat box. Andries, do you want to try one last time? We just received another message from Johan. What is your feeling for the future of sports and recreational areas like golf courses and sports club, with land reforming and housing regarding private financial states?
Yeah, I have to think on the move now. 2 things. I don't think this virus is going to be around forever. And I do think that we sport crazy people in South Africa. And as sport crazy people, I think that will eventually bounce back. Like, for example, in golf courses, and people will go back to golf courses again eventually. That is it's a high-end kind of activity in the case of golf courses, and I think you guys will probably benefit from that. Although, yeah, so I think there will be a bounce back on certain kinds of sports, like, for example, golf is a very good example. And then another example that I also think you guys can benefit from is this thing about everybody moving into security complexes, and that will continue that specific trend. And of course, that is also an opportunity that I guess is where landscapers can also get some business opportunities as well. And more people moving into these security estates. So yes, that certainly is another positive for your industry.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions.
Okay, thanks, Dawie. That was really enlightening. I must just tell everybody that this whole webinar is being recorded, so it will be available afterwards in case you missed part of it. You definitely gave us a lot of food for thought, and even though we're in a different industry than you, I think there's a lot of things that we can take home from that. So thanks very much for
that. I'm putting my email address in the chat box, so anybody is welcome to send me an email if you need any more information, if I can help and assist with anything. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thanks very much. So we're going to go over to see who's few of our partners, and then afterwards I'll introduce the next speaker. Thank you for Just Trees for their support.
Hunter Industries is a family-owned global company that provides high-quality, efficient solutions for irrigation and outdoor lighting. A diverse range of products can be seen everywhere, from residential landscapes to stadiums, national landmarks, theme parks, city parks, commercial complexes, hotels, and municipal buildings around the world. Whether you're from New York, Shanghai, Sydney, Paris, or Cape Town, the odds are you've probably encountered Hunter product somewhere along the way.